Humphrey Bogart once refused to speak to James Stewart. What he did next made Hollywood stop and stare. October 1951, Los Angeles. The Santa Ana winds swept through the hills, carrying dust and heat into the sound stages of Warner Brothers. The temperature inside Stage 12 hovered around 92 degrees. Crew members wiped sweat from their foreheads. Lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Humphrey Bogart stood near the craft services table, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His eyes were fixed on the entrance. He hadn't moved in 3 minutes. His co-star for the evening. James Stewart was late. Not just late. 27 minutes late. In Hollywood, time was money. Every minute of delay cost the studio thousands. But this wasn't about money. This was about respect. And Humphrey Bogart had built his entire career on the idea that respect was earned through punctuality, professionalism and presence. The director, a young man named William Keighley, approached Bogart cautiously. He could see the tension in Bogart's jaw, the way his fingers gripped the cigarette a little too tightly. "Bogey, I'm sure there's an explanation. Traffic, maybe, or a meeting ran over." Bogart didn't look at him. He simply exhaled a thin stream of smoke and said, "There's always an explanation, Bill. The question is whether the explanation matters." The crew exchanged glances. They had seen Bogart irritated before. They had seen him annoyed. But this was something different. This was cold, calculated, the kind of anger that didn't explode. It froze. At 4:47 p.m., the stage door opened. James Stewart walked in, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor. He was smiling, that easy, gentle smile that had made him one of the most beloved actors in America. He raised a hand in greeting, completely unaware of the storm he was walking into. "Afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the delay. Had a bit of a situation on Sunset Boulevard, fender bender. Nothing serious, but you know how the police are." The crew nodded sympathetically. A few even chuckled. Stewart had that effect on people. He could walk into any room and make everyone feel at ease. Everyone except Humphrey Bogart. Bogart turned slowly. His cigarette had burned down to the filter. He crushed it in the ashtray without looking, his eyes locked on Stewart the entire time. Stewart's smile faltered. He recognized that look. He had seen it in 100 films. The look of a man who had made a decision. And the decision wasn't good. "Jimmy," Bogart said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "We've been waiting." Stewart nodded, his expression shifting from casual to concerned. "I know, Bogey. I apologize. Like I said, there was an accident on Sunset, and I heard you the first time." The words hung in the air like smoke. The crew stopped moving. Even the buzzing of the lights seemed to quiet. Stewart took a step forward, his hands spread in a gesture of reconciliation. "Look, I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. But these things happen. I got here as fast as I could." Bogart said nothing. He simply stared. Stewart continued, his voice softening. "We're professionals, Bogey. Let's just get to work and put this behind us. What do you say?" For a long moment, nothing happened. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Bogart did something no one expected. He turned away. Without another word, without a single acknowledgement, Humphrey Bogart walked off the sound stage. He didn't look back. He didn't explain. He simply left. The crew stood in stunned silence. James Stewart remained frozen in place, his hand still extended in that gesture of peace that had been utterly rejected. William Keighley rushed after Bogart, catching up with him in the hallway outside. "Bogey, what are you doing? We have a schedule to keep. The studio is going to have a fit." Bogart stopped. He pulled another cigarette from his pocket and lit it with practiced ease. "Bill, let me tell you something. I've been in this business for 25 years. I've worked with legends and I've worked with fools. And the one thing I've learned is that how a man treats other people's time tells you everything you need to know about his character." Keighley frowned. "It was just a traffic accident, Bogey. It could have happened to anyone." Bogart took a long drag on his cigarette. "Maybe, but I don't think so. Jimmy Stewart is a good man, one of the best in this town, and that's exactly why this matters." Keighley didn't understand. How could refusing to speak to one of the nicest men in Hollywood be a sign of respect? Bogart seemed to read his thoughts. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "You'll see, Bill. Give it time." He walked away, leaving the director alone in the hallway, more confused than before. Back on the soundstage, James Stewart stood motionless. The crew had begun to disperse, unsure of what to do. But Stewart didn't move. He was replaying the last 5 minutes in his mind, trying to understand what had just happened. He had been late. That was true, but he had apologized. He had explained. What more could he have done? And then, slowly, a thought began to form. A thought that would change everything. Maybe the apology wasn't enough. Maybe the explanation wasn't the point. Stewart thought about all the times he had been kept waiting, all the times other actors had strolled onto set late, full of excuses and charm, and he thought about how that had made him feel, not angry exactly, but dismissed, as if his time, his preparation, his commitment didn't matter. He had always let it go. He was Jimmy Stewart, after all, the nice guy, the one who never made waves. But standing there in the silence left by Bogart's departure, he realized something. Being nice wasn't the same as being respected, and sometimes being too nice meant letting people take you for granted, including yourself. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. These are the stories Hollywood tried to bury, the moments that reveal who these legends really were behind the camera. If you want to see the truth that history forgot, hit that subscribe button now. 3 days passed. The production was on hold. Warner Brothers executives were furious. Phone calls were made, threats were issued, lawyers were consulted. But Humphrey Bogart refused to return to set, and he still refused to speak to James Stewart. The press got wind of the situation almost immediately. Headlines screamed about feuds and ego clashes. Reporters camped outside Bogart's home in Holmby Hills, hoping for a statement. They got nothing. Meanwhile, James Stewart retreated to his own home in Beverly Hills. He cancelled his social engagements. He stopped answering the phone. His wife, Gloria, watched him with growing concern. "Jimmy, you have to talk to someone about this. You can't just sit here and brood." Stewart sat in his study, staring out the window at the manicured lawn. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the room. "I'm not brooding, Gloria. I'm thinking." "About what?" He was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "About who I want to be." Gloria sat down beside him. She had been married to James Stewart for 2 years now. She knew him better than anyone, and she knew that when he got that look in his eyes, something important was happening inside him. "Tell me," she said softly. Stewart turned to face her. His expression was troubled but determined. "I've spent my whole career being the nice guy, the one everybody likes, the one who never causes trouble. And I always thought that was a good thing. I thought being agreeable was the same as being professional." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But Bogey showed me something. When he walked off that set, he wasn't being petty, he wasn't throwing a tantrum. He was making a point about respect, about standards, about the kind of man he is." Gloria nodded slowly. "And what about the kind of man you are?" Stewart's jaw tightened. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." The next morning, James Stewart did something unexpected. He drove to Humphrey Bogart's home. He didn't call ahead. He didn't send a message through intermediaries. He simply showed up. The Bogart residence was a modest affair by Hollywood standards. A 2-story Spanish colonial with a red tile roof and a courtyard filled with bougainvillea. Bogart's wife, Lauren Bacall, answered the door. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Stewart standing there, but she recovered quickly, her famous composure intact. "Jimmy, this is a surprise." Stewart removed his hat, holding it in both hands like a supplicant. "I know, Betty, and I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I need to speak with Bogey. If he'll see me." Bacall studied him for a long moment. She was only 27 years old, but she had the wisdom of someone twice her age. She could see the sincerity in Stewart's eyes, the humility in his posture. "Wait here," she said, and she disappeared into the house. Stewart stood on the doorstep, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he was going to say. He wasn't even sure what he hoped to accomplish. All he knew was that something important was happening, and he couldn't run from it. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Stewart began to wonder if he should leave. Maybe Bogart wouldn't see him. Maybe this whole trip had been a mistake. And then the door opened. Humphrey Bogart stood in the doorway wearing a simple white shirt and tan slacks. His hair was uncombed. He hadn't shaved. He looked like a man who had been doing some thinking of his own. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They simply looked at each other. Two of the greatest actors of their generation, stripped of all pretense. Then Stewart spoke. His voice was quiet, almost humble. "Bogey, I didn't come here to make excuses. I didn't come here to explain myself. I came here to tell you that you were right." Bogart's expression didn't change. He waited. Stewart continued. "When I walked onto that set 27 minutes late, I was disrespecting everyone who had shown up on time. The crew, the director, you. I was acting like my time was more valuable than theirs, and that's not the man I want to be." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "I've spent my whole life trying to be liked, trying to keep everyone happy. But somewhere along the way I forgot that being respected is more important than being liked, and you reminded me of that, so thank you." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Stewart felt exposed, vulnerable, like he had just shown Bogart his soul. And then something remarkable happened. Humphrey Bogart smiled, not his famous sardonic smirk, a genuine warm smile that transformed his entire face. "Jimmy," he said, "come inside. I think it's time we had a real conversation." The two men sat in Bogart's study, a room filled with books and movie memorabilia. Bacall brought them coffee and then tactfully withdrew, sensing that this was a moment between the two men alone. Bogart lit a cigarette and leaned back in his chair. "You know, Jimmy, I've been thinking too. These past few days, I've been asking myself if I did the right thing, walking off like that, causing all this trouble." Stewart looked at him with surprise. "And what did you decide?" Bogart took a long drag on his cigarette, exhaling slowly. "I decided that sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong to everyone else, and you have to be okay with that." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "When I started in this business, I was nothing, a rich kid from New York who thought he could act. I got kicked around, humiliated, told I'd never make it, and the only thing that kept me going was my standards, my sense of what was acceptable and what wasn't." He pointed the cigarette at Stewart. "You're different. You came into this town golden. Everybody loved you from day one, and that's great, that's a gift. But it can also be a curse, because when everybody loves you, you stop demanding things. You stop insisting on respect. You start thinking that being nice is enough." Stewart nodded slowly. He understood now. Bogart hadn't been punishing him. He had been teaching him. "So what happens now?" Stewart asked. Bogart grinned, that famous crooked grin that had made women swoon and men trust him. "Now, we go back to work. We make the best damn picture Warner Brothers has ever seen. And we show this town what real professionals look like." He extended his hand across the table. Stewart took it without hesitation. "Deal." The next day, both men returned to stage 12 at Warner Brothers. They arrived at exactly the same time, 7 o'clock in the morning, 30 minutes before call time. The crew was already there, setting up lights and adjusting equipment. When Bogart and Stewart walked in together, the room fell silent. Everyone had heard the stories. Everyone expected tension, awkwardness, perhaps even another confrontation. Instead, they saw something that would become legendary in Hollywood. Bogart put his arm around Stewart's shoulder and addressed the entire crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apologize for the delay in production. Jimmy and I had some things to work out, but I'm happy to report that we've come to an understanding." He looked at Stewart with genuine affection. "This man right here is one of the finest actors I've ever worked with, and more importantly, he's one of the finest men. From this moment on, I want everyone to know that I consider James Stewart not just a colleague, but a friend." Stewart cleared his throat, visibly moved. "And I want to say something too. Bogey taught me a valuable lesson these past few days. He taught me that respect isn't something you're entitled to. It's something you earn, every day with every choice you make, and from now on that's how I intend to live my life." The crew burst into applause, not the polite, obligatory applause of Hollywood events, real applause, the kind that comes from the heart. William Keighley watched from the sidelines, a smile spreading across his face. He had been directing films for 20 years, and he had never seen anything like this. "All right, everyone," he called out, "let's make a movie." And they did. The production, which had seemed doomed just days before, became one of the smoothest in Warner Brothers history. Bogart and Stewart developed an on-screen chemistry that was electric. Their scenes together crackled with energy and authenticity. But it was off-screen that the real magic happened. Every morning, without fail, both men arrived at exactly the same time. They would walk in together, share a cup of coffee, and go over the day's scenes. They challenged each other, pushed each other, made each other better. The crew noticed the change immediately. The atmosphere on set transformed from professional to familial. People started arriving early, staying late, going the extra mile. Because when your leading men set that kind of example, everyone rises to meet it. If this story is touching something inside you right now, leave a comment saying, "Respect is earned, not given." Let me know if you understand what these two legends discovered in that moment. The film wrapped in December 1951, 3 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. The studio executives, who had been ready to shut down the production just weeks earlier, were stunned. But the story doesn't end there. What happened next would cement the friendship between Humphrey Bogart and James Stewart in Hollywood history. January 1952, New Year's Eve. Bogart was hosting a party at his home, a tradition he had maintained for years. The guest list read like a who's who of Hollywood royalty. John Huston, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, Frank Sinatra. But there was one guest Bogart was particularly eager to see. James Stewart arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Gloria was on his arm, radiant in a silver evening gown. Bogart met them at the door personally. "Jimmy, Gloria, welcome. I was starting to wonder if you'd make it." Stewart smiled. "We considered being fashionably late, but someone taught me that punctuality is a sign of respect." Bogart laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed through the foyer. Come in, there's someone I want you to meet." He led them through the crowded living room, past clusters of famous faces engaged in animated conversation. Finally, they reached a quiet corner where an elderly gentleman sat alone nursing a glass of whiskey. "Jimmy, this is my father, Belmont DeForest Bogart. Dad, this is James Stewart." The old man looked up. His eyes were sharp despite his age, studying Stewart with obvious interest. "So you're the one my son wouldn't stop talking about?" Stewart glanced at Bogart, surprised. Bogart shrugged, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "I may have mentioned you once or twice." The elder Bogart gestured for Stewart to sit beside him. "My son doesn't make friends easily, Mr. Stewart. He never has. Too stubborn, too proud. But when he does make a friend, it's for life." Stewart sat down, genuinely touched. "Sir, I want you to know that your son taught me something important, something that changed the way I see myself and my work." The old man nodded slowly. "That's the Bogart way. We don't say much, but when we act, we mean it." Later that night, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Bogart and Stewart found themselves alone on the back patio. The city lights of Los Angeles sparkled in the distance. The air was cool and clear, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Bogart lit a cigarette and offered one to Stewart. Stewart declined, as he always did. "Hell of a year," Bogart said quietly. Stewart nodded. "Hell of a year." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, two men who had discovered something valuable in each other. Not just professional respect, but genuine friendship. "You know," Bogart said eventually, "when I walked off that set in October, I didn't know what would happen. I just knew I had to make a statement about who I am, about what I believe in." Stewart turned to look at him. "And what do you believe in, Bogey?" Bogart considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe that every man has a code, a set of principles he lives by, and the moment he compromises those principles, even for convenience, even for peace, he starts to lose himself." He took a drag on his cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the darkness. "When you showed up late that day, it wasn't about the 27 minutes. It was about what those minutes represented, a willingness to let standards slide, to prioritize charm over commitment." Stewart nodded slowly. "And when you came to my door," Bogart continued, "when you showed up without excuses, without defenses, just ready to listen and learn, that's when I knew." "Knew what?" Bogart smiled. "That you were the real deal, that underneath all that nice guy stuff was a man of real character, a man I could trust." The words hung in the air between them, more valuable than any award or accolade Hollywood could bestow. Stewart felt something shift inside him. A burden he hadn't even known he was carrying seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Bogey, for not letting me off the hook, for demanding more from me than I was demanding from myself." Bogart stubbed out his cigarette. "That's what friends are for. Friends are. Jimmy, now let's get back inside before our wives come looking for us." The following years would prove the strength of their bond. Through triumphs and tragedies, through the ups and downs of Hollywood life, Bogart and Stewart remained close. When Bogart was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 1956, James Stewart was one of the first people he told, not his agent, not his studio, his friend. The diagnosis came in November. The doctors gave Bogart less than a year to live. He faced the news the same way he faced everything else in his life, with courage, with dignity, without complaint. But even Humphrey Bogart needed support, and James Stewart was determined to provide it. Every week, without fail, Stewart visited Bogart at his home. Sometimes they would talk about the old days, the films they had made, the stars they had known. Sometimes they would sit in silence, watching old movies on the television set in Bogart's study. Lauren Bacall watched these visits with profound gratitude. She knew how much they meant to her husband. In those final months when the pain was constant and the future was clear, Jimmy Stewart's friendship was a lifeline. One afternoon in January 1957, Stewart arrived for his weekly visit to find Bogart in unusually high spirits. "Jimmy," Bogart said, his voice weak but his eyes bright, "I've been thinking. Stewart sat down beside the bed, concerned by how much weight his friend had lost since the previous week. About what, Bogey? About that day, October 1951, stage 12 at Warner Brothers. Stewart smiled at the memory. What about it? Bogart reached out and gripped Stewart's hand with surprising strength. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, not walking off, not making a point, meeting you, really meeting you, seeing the man you could become. Stewart felt tears welling in his eyes. He didn't try to stop them. Bogey? No, let me finish. I've got something to say and I might not get another chance. He paused to catch his breath, the effort of speaking clearly taking its toll. In this business you meet a lot of people. Actors, directors, producers, most of them are full of it. They smile to your face and stab you in the back. But every once in a while you meet someone real, someone who means what they say and says what they mean. He looked directly into Stewart's eyes. You're one of those people, Jimmy, and I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never compromise. Promise me you'll keep those standards we talked about. Promise me you'll be the man I know you can be. Stewart squeezed Bogart's hand. I promise. Bogart nodded, satisfied. Then, with that famous, crooked smile, he added, and promise me you'll never be late again. Stewart laughed through his tears. I promise that too. Humphrey Bogart passed away on January 14th, 1957. He was 57 years old. The funeral was held at All Saints Episcopal Church in Beverly Hills. Thousands of fans lined the streets. Every major star in Hollywood attended. James Stewart delivered one of the eulogies. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of famous faces, and spoke from the heart. I first met Bogey on a film set in 1951. I was 27 minutes late, and he refused to speak to me. At the time, I thought he was being difficult. I thought he was being petty. I was wrong. He paused, gathering himself. Bogey wasn't punishing me. He was challenging me. He was asking me a question that I had never asked myself. What kind of man do you want to be? His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. That question changed my life. It changed my career. It changed the way I treat every person I meet. Because Bogey taught me that respect isn't a formality. It's a choice. It's a commitment. It's the foundation of everything that matters. He looked down at the casket, draped in white roses. My friend is gone, but the lessons he taught me will live forever. And every time I show up on time, every time I treat someone's time as valuable as my own, I'll be honoring his memory. He stepped down from the podium, wiping his eyes. Lauren Bacall met him at the bottom of the steps and embraced him. Thank you, Jimmy, she whispered. He would have loved that. I meant every word. In the years that followed, James Stewart became known as the most reliable, most professional actor in Hollywood. Directors fought to work with him. Producers trusted him implicitly. Younger actors sought his advice. And whenever anyone asked him the secret of his success, he would tell them the same story, the story of an October afternoon in 1951, when Humphrey Bogart taught him the most important lesson of his life. He never missed another call time, not once. In over 25 more years of making films, James Stewart was never late to set again. It wasn't about the time, it was about the principle, the commitment, the respect. That was Bogart's legacy, and Stewart carried it with him until the end of his own remarkable life. The film they made together, the one that had caused so much trouble, went on to become a classic. Critics praised the chemistry between the two leads. Audiences packed theaters across the country. But for Stewart, the film itself was almost beside the point. What mattered was what it represented, a turning point, a moment of reckoning, a friendship forged in confrontation and tempered by time. Years later, in 1997, James Stewart sat in his study, surrounded by awards and photographs from a lifetime in Hollywood. He was 89 years old. His health was failing. His wife, Gloria, had passed away 3 years earlier. Most of his friends from the Golden Age were gone. But on his desk, in a simple silver frame, sat a photograph that had remained in the same place for over 40 years. It showed two men on a film set. One was Humphrey Bogart, cigarette in hand, that famous smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The other was James Stewart, taller and leaner, looking at Bogart with obvious affection. The photograph had been taken in December 1951, on the last day of production. Stewart remembered the moment vividly. They had just finished their final scene together, and the crew had spontaneously burst into applause. Someone had captured the moment, and Bogart had given Stewart a copy. "Keep this," Bogart had said, "so you remember." Stewart had never forgotten. He picked up the photograph now, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "I kept my promise, Bogey," he said softly to the empty room. I never compromised. I never let standards slide. I tried to be the man you believed I could be. His housekeeper found him like that the next morning, still holding the photograph, a peaceful expression on his face. James Stewart passed away on July 2nd, 1997, exactly 6 months after that quiet moment in his study. At his memorial service, a letter was read that Stewart had written decades earlier, to be shared only after his death. "If you're listening to this," the letter began, "then I've finally gone to see my old friend Bogey. I imagine he'll have plenty to say about how long I kept him waiting, but this time I won't mind being a little late. I lived a good life. I made films I'm proud of. I loved and was loved, but the thing I'm most grateful for is a lesson I learned on a film set in 1951. A lesson about respect, about standards, about what it means to be a man. Bogey taught me that your character isn't defined by your talents or your success. It's defined by how you treat people when no one is watching. It's defined by the standards you keep even when it would be easier to let them slide. So if I have any advice for those who come after me, it's this. Be on time. Not just to appointments or meetings or call times. Be on time with your kindness. Be on time with your honesty. Be on time with your respect. The world needs more people like Humphrey Bogart. People who demand the best from themselves and everyone around them. People who would rather walk off a set than compromise their principles. I was lucky enough to know such a man. I was lucky enough to call him my friend, and I spent the rest of my life trying to live up to his example. They don't make men like Bogey anymore, but maybe, just maybe, if we remember his lessons, we can come close. The letter ended there, but the story continued. In the decades since both men passed, their friendship has become legendary. Film scholars study it. Biographers write about it. Young actors invoke it as an example of what Hollywood used to be. But the real legacy isn't in the books or the documentaries. The real legacy lives in every person who has ever shown up on time because they respected someone else's schedule. In every professional who has held themselves to a higher standard because they knew it mattered. In every friendship that was forged through honesty rather than convenience. Humphrey Bogart and James Stewart showed us something important that October day in 1951. They showed us that real respect sometimes looks like conflict. That true friendship sometimes requires confrontation. That being a good person isn't about being nice, it's about being principled. In a world that too often rewards charm over character, their story stands as a reminder that how we treat people matters, that our standards define us, that the willingness to demand better from ourselves and from those we care about is perhaps the greatest gift we can give. Where are you watching from right now? Take a moment to think about the people in your life who have challenged you, the ones who refused to accept your excuses, the ones who demanded more from you than you were demanding from yourself. Those people aren't obstacles, they're gifts, just like Humphrey Bogart was a gift to James Stewart, just like their friendship was a gift to Hollywood, just like their story is a gift to us. If you watch this far, it's because you understood. You felt it. The power of two men who chose principle over popularity, respect over comfort, truth over convenience. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel." Your comment means the world to me, and it tells me that these stories matter to you as much as they matter to me. If this video moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be struggling with their own standards, someone who might need a reminder that character still matters. And if you're not already subscribed, now is the time. This channel is dedicated to preserving the stories that Hollywood has forgotten. The moments of courage, integrity, and humanity that shaped the golden age of cinema. Every week we dig deeper into history to find the truth behind the legends. Subscribe now and join our community. Because in a world that seems to have forgotten what real character looks like, we need to remember. We need to preserve. We need to honor. October 1951, Los Angeles. Two of the greatest actors of all time. One conflict that changed everything. Humphrey Bogart once refused to speak to James Stewart. What he did next didn't just make Hollywood stop and stare. It reminded the world what real respect looks like. And that's a lesson worth remembering. They don't make men like them anymore.